Hello and welcome to another episode of the Faye Jones Life Podcast. This is your host, Faye Jones, and today we are talking about understanding the trauma culture. But before we get started, I just want to say thank you to all of you for your prayers and support and for your patience while I returned. I know that literally 2 months ago, we were supposed to start our new podcast season, and 24 hours after the last podcast, we had a family emergency with my mom. She had some health issues that needed to be taken care of, and I spent 2 months with her, helping her out while she got better. So now I'm back, and we're going to go ahead and jump in to everything that we had planned for this podcast. But again, I want to thank you for giving me that blessing to be able to spend that time with my mom and to be fully present without having to worry about the podcast or anything else. You have no idea how much I truly appreciate that. Now, going back to the topic of understanding the trauma culture. One of the reasons that we are doing this series on the trauma culture stems from a conversation that I had with God a while back, where he was telling me about how I needed to confront the trauma culture in my life, in the society that I lived in, and in my own family. And we all know that trauma is when a person has an experience, either continuously or a one-time event, that is so jarring, the brain has a difficult time processing it, and therefore it can cause some emotional, mental, and even physical distress to such an extent that it inhibits the person from functioning in life to the same level that they were before. So when we define trauma culture, what we're defining is a collective of societal understandings that create or lead to trauma. And we're not just emphasizing on an individual experience, but as a society. So what are some characteristics of trauma culture? Victim blaming, gaslighting, silence and suppression, the tough it out mentality, and misunderstanding the healing process. And all of those things, as we can see, can lead to a culture of trauma. And let me give you some examples of trauma culture based on those 5 things that I mentioned. For instance, if we live in a society that sees it as okay to mistreat women, for that example, anytime somebody abuses a woman, they're gonna say, well, what did the woman do? It was the woman's fault. That is what victim blaming looks like. Gaslighting, I know that's something we've been talking about as a culture a lot, especially because the topic of narcissistic relationships and narcissism is top and center. And gaslighting is essentially where a person may say or do something and then completely deny it and make you think that you're going crazy, essentially. Like, you didn't say that. They didn't do that thing. You know they did. But now they're making you question yourself. Silence and suppression. This exists a lot in homes and even in work environments too, but let's focus on home and family when there's abuse. This is why sometimes, especially with children, we see, and even with battered spouses, we see that they're like, well, we've been there so many times and we didn't know. How come you didn't say anything? Well, a lot of the times those victims are being threatened to be silent or suppress what's going on. There's another aspect where it's the tough it out mentality. And I want to be very careful with this one, because to an extent there's certain things that we have to learn to tough out. We have to toughen up. We can't be wearing our feelings in a sleeve. But the tough it out means in this instance of trauma culture where there's no empathy or understanding whatsoever of the experience that that person is undergoing, and there's also no interest in trying to understand the experience and the situation that person is going through. It's essentially this is what it is, take care or leave it. And while there's instances where we do have to kind of use that approach, when it is the only approach, then it becomes a problem. Because now what we're doing is we're neglecting the person, we're invalidating them, and we're also letting them know that they have no value. And that's a problem. There's also the misunderstanding of the healing process, and that leads to trauma. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the tough it out, because for instance, somebody who has gone through a traumatic experience, and so now they may experience certain phobias, to certain fears, to certain situations. Everybody would be like, oh, well, maybe that happened 10 years ago. You just have to get over it, tough it out. It's not that easy. Depending on the type of trauma and the extent and exposure to that trauma, there's not just spiritual things that have to deal with, but physiologically, the mind and the body have to be able to release that trauma. And while some people, when we address the spiritual side of things, heal very quickly, there's some others where there's some psychological work that has to take place. And this is, one example. Somebody, I'll use myself. I was in a motorcycle accident 3 years ago. And that motorcycle accident, I broke several bones. And the healing process of regaining my energy back, my flexibility, mobility, all those things has been a process. Even though you guys see me that I'm like, I look good. I don't look like there's anything wrong with me. I've lost mobility in my arm. And there's days where there's a little bit of neuropathy in the hands because I broke both of my wrists and one of them required nuts and bolts to put them back together. During cold weather, I definitely know that there's plates in my body because those areas where there's metal plates, I feel a deep ache that goes all the way down into the bone. And though some days I'm moving really good, some days I wake up super stiff. And some people, because they've never been in that situation, they don't understand that process, and they may say things or expect things from me that I have to be very clearly and to say, hey, today you're not going to be able to get that from me. Today, this is about as far as I can go. Today, this is about as much as I can do, because physically speaking, I'm not there yet. And in a healthy culture, those around you are understanding when you explain these things, and they want to seek more education to understand what is it like when somebody goes through an accident and they're a physical trauma patient, and what are the physiological challenges, what are the emotional and mental challenges, and so forth, and work with you. In a trauma culture, however, the misunderstanding of the healing process occurs not because the person going through the trauma, in this case, for my example, myself, is not communicating, but rather because the people on the other side are not wanting to even get educated on the process, and they rather go on with their own misconceptions and ideologies of how it should be, even though they've never experienced it or been in those shoes. Thankfully, I haven't experienced that when it comes to my accident, but I put myself as an example because I've seen a lot of people in the recent years go through that. And not just for accidents, but when they get diagnosed with illnesses, or if they reveal that they've gone through a very traumatic experience where they've been abused or hurt in some sort of a way. And people just have these crazy misconceptions and misunderstanding about the person. And so, why should we talk about this? And that is really a great question. One of the reasons why we're going to be talking about this in this series, and we're going to be breaking down different types of abuse and all of these things, it's because if we don't address this, I'm going to tell you right now, in the next 10 years or so, we're going to have a generation that won't have the mental or emotional capacity to function. There's already such a high demand for mental health that there's not enough mental health professionals to help everyone who's seeking help. And the answer is not getting more psychotherapists and psychologists, even though, hey, I'm going that route myself of getting trained in that area so I can go beyond life coaching and actually provide therapy and help people heal at an even deeper level. However, the problem is, if we don't address the root cause of the problem, having more therapists and psychologists, psychiatrists, medications, etc., becomes a band-aid. We have to look at those toxic and negative patterns in our own lives, in our families, and in the society that we live in, and confront them, address them, so that we can create an environment where, unless of causing wound and deep wounds and trauma, we can create an environment where there is healing and growth in every individual. And one of the ways that we're seeing that this dharma culture is affecting us, let's just look at the shootings in the schools, where a lot of these individuals were bullied at some point, and they were so messed up by that and not having proper outlets to be able to deal with those issues, that they saw it fit to take out their anger and their frustration on innocent people by taking their lives. And in no way, shape, or form are we glorifying the people who committed these atrocities, because I don't know that there will ever be an excuse for taking somebody else's life. However, we have to understand that this is the fruit of the trauma culture that we have directly and indirectly established in our nation and in nations around the world. So now we have to break the cycle. And breaking the cycle is going to require confronting the issues. But how do we confront the issues? How do we identify all of the different ways that trauma culture shows up? We're going to be discussing that in future episodes. So this podcast episode is going to be really short. And I'm actually going to have some help for some of these podcast episodes. I'm going to be having some special guests. I won't tell you which episodes they are, but we will be having some special guests so we can talk about that. This is just kind of the introduction to this series and what we're going to be talking about. So in future podcasts, we're going to break this down even further. With that said, I want to thank you so much for joining me today in this podcast episode of the Faye Jones Life podcast. I'm going to invite you to visit FayeJonesLife.com, where you will find these podcast episodes as well as blog articles on different topics related to relationships, family, healing from trauma, and so forth. And you will also find some resources there. We have worksheets, workbooks, prayer journal, and we also are in the process of offering some coaching. Coaching will be opening back up on October 17th. So for those of you who want one-on-one coaching, keep an eye out for the information on my website as well as on social media, because starting October 17th, we open the doors back up to one-on-one coaching. With that said, again, I want to say thank you for joining me today, and that website is FayeJonesLife.com. God bless. Bye-bye.